July 4th, 1943. Forward Command Post, Army Group South, near Belgorod. A low rumble rolls across the open steppe like distant thunder. In a cramped wooden dugout, General Oberst Hermann Hoth, commander of the German 4th Panzer Army, brushes dust from his map table as another tremor shakes the ground. At first he thinks it's the artillery batteries firing their opening registration rounds. But then he hears it again, deeper, heavier. An unmistakable metallic growl. Tanks. Many of them. Not German. He steps outside into the humid dusk. The air tastes of electricity and smoke from the preparation fires. Searchlights sweep across the horizon as engineers finish clearing lanes through their own minefields. A light drizzle begins to fall, dotting his field glasses. Hoth snaps them up to his eyes. To the north, over a fold in the terrain, he sees shapes, slow, deliberate shapes, silhouetted by flashes of distant thunder. They aren't moving toward him. They're maneuvering, repositioning, waiting. And there are hundreds. The general's jaw tightens. He'd been warned the Soviets were massing tanks in unprecedented numbers. But nothing, no report from intelligence, no briefing from OKH, captured the sheer scale of what now lay across the steppe. Behind him, a Panzer IV clatters into position, its Maybach engine coughing while the crew checks radio connections. Oberleutnant Kruger, the vehicle commander, leans out of the turret and mutters to his loader, "Verdammt, they're already there." Hoth hears him, but pretends not to. Instead, he lowers the binoculars and whispers to himself, "This won't be like Kharkov. Not this time." He turns and walks back toward the command post as the first German assault waves prepare to launch Operation Citadel. Hitler's grand offensive intended to pinch off the Kursk salient and restore the Wehrmacht strategic initiative on the Eastern Front. But Hoth already senses the truth. The Red Army is ready. More ready than any German commander has ever seen. And on the eve of the largest armored clash in history, he feels, for the first time in the war, a quiet, unspoken dread. Hours later, under the cover of darkness, German armored columns form up along the dusty forward tracks. Engines idle. Drivers stare into the blackness. Tank commanders lean forward in their cupolas, listening, waiting. A storm of mosquitoes hangs over the marshes. The steppe grasses shake in the warm wind. Inside his Tiger tank, Hauptmann Franz Stadegger wipes a smear of grease from his hands and slaps the radio headset over his ears. The intercom crackles. All crews, ready for assault positions. H-hour approaching. Stadegger's Tiger is a machine built for intimidation. 56 tons of steel, an 88mm KWK, 36 cannon capable of punching through Soviet armor at 2 kilometers. He runs his gloved hand across the breach. His life depends on it. He exchanges a glance with his gunner, Feldwebel Mahler, whose face is lit only by the faint red glow of the instrument lights. "You think it'll be like Kharkov again?" Muller asks. Stadegger doesn't answer immediately. Command says the Reds dug in deep. He finally replies, "If they know we're coming, then God help us." Outside, the artillery begins. German Nebelwerfers scream like banshees into the night sky, their trails of fire arcing high before plunging into Soviet lines. The ground shakes with the rhythmic thump of howitzers firing in rolling waves. The offensive has begun, but even through the roar of outgoing fire, everyone can still hear it. The distant thunder of engines to the east at T-34S. KV-1s. Even rumors of a new monster. The KV-85 and the mysterious Su-152 Beast Killer. The Soviets are waiting. By dawn, the battlefield is lit with a pale orange haze, smoke, dust, and the faint reflection of rising sunlight off thousands of armored hulls. General Hoth steps into his observation post overlooking the Belgorod-Kursk highway. Officers stand around him, their faces drawn and sleepless. Major Stein reports. Recon confirms. Multiple defensive belts, anti-tank ditches, and fortifications. Mines as far as the eye can see. Hoth nods. They expected this. What they didn't expect was the next line. And aerial reconnaissance shows the Soviets massing reserves behind Prokhorovka. Fresh armored corps. Possibly up to 1,200 tanks. The words land like a hammer. That number doesn't sound real. IT sounds like a clerical error, an exaggeration, a miscount. But when Hoff looks across the steppe, he knows it's real. He tightens his gloves and says quietly, "Then we have no choice. We break through before they throw that weight at us." He steps up to the field radio. "Order to all panzer units. Advance." The attack begins as the German armor surges forward. The opening hours are a nightmare. The minefields are deeper than expected. Engineers crawl under fire, probing the soil with bayonets while Soviet machine guns rake the open ground. Stukas swoop low, dropping bombs that tear craters into the earth, but the defensive lines hold. Panther tanks at the front line struggle. Brand new and rushed into service, their final drives overheat. Several ignite before firing a single shot. Staudegger's Tiger crushes its way forward, the metal grinding over the lip of an anti-tank ditch. Ahead, Soviet trenches spit fire, anti-tank rifles, machine guns, and the deep crack of Zis, 3 guns. Muller calls out targets 11 o'clock. A group of T-34s bursts from behind a ridge, racing forward with reckless momentum. Their engines howl as they charge directly into the German spearhead. "Load AP." Staudegger shouts. The breech slams. The Tiger fires. T-34 erupts in flame. Another shell whistles past, ricocheting off the Tiger's forward plate with a shower of sparks. The tank rocks, but holds firm. Staudegger fires again and again. Around him, the battlefield becomes a swirling inferno of smoke, debris, and metal. The air smells of burning oil and cordite. German tanks push forward, but the Soviets never stop coming. For every T-34 destroyed, 2 more emerge from hidden revetments. Their tracks churn the black soil. Their turrets swing in unison. Then artillery. Soviet guns unleash a barrage so intense that even inside the Tiger, Staudegger feels the shockwaves in his chest. Outside, infantry dive for cover as shrapnel tears across the steppe. Hoth watches from his command point, his binoculars trembling slightly. He sees the depth of the defenses, that he sees the endless rows of dug-in Soviet guns. He sees the counterattacks forming even before his panzers reach the first offensive belt. This wasn't a surprise. Attack.it was an ambush, on a scale unmatched in modern warfare. The Red Army is executing a defense in depth so vast, so methodical, that Hoth feels the cold realization creeping up his spine. Kursk isn't merely a battle, it's a trap, and the Wehrmacht has driven straight into it. He lowers the binoculars and whispers, "My God, this is not winnable." But the battle is only beginning. July 11th, 1943. Eastern approaches to Prokhorovka, south of the Sel River. The night is unnaturally still. No wind, no insects, no distant artillery. Just the heavy, suffocating silence that comes before something catastrophic. The Germans don't know it yet, but this is the last quiet moment many of them will ever hear. Inside his Tiger, Hauptmann Franz Staudegger runs a hand across the condensation forming on the interior steel. The engines around him idle in a deep mechanical symphony, PZIVs, Tigers, assault guns, waiting for the order to move. Outside, the horizon flickers faintly, as if the sky itself is breathing fire. Army Group South has spent an entire week pushing, bleeding, forward through minefields, trenches, and anti-tank belts. The cost has been enormous. The reward is small, but now they are close. Very close point, one more push, and they believe they can crack the Soviet defense entirely. But the Soviets are not retreating. They are concentrating to T0, 300 hours. General Hoth receives a dispatch from reconnaissance. Large Soviet armored force massing east of Prokhorovka. Possibly reserves from the 5th Guards Tank Army. Hoth exhales slowly, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. Guards. The word alone carries weight. These are elite units, well-equipped, battle-hardened, and commanded by generals who do not break. He turns to Oberst Schmidt, his operations chief. "How many?" Schmidt hesitates. Estimates vary, but several hundred at least. Possibly more. Hoth closes his eyes, but it's happening. The very moment he feared. The Soviets aren't trying to hold the line, they're preparing to counterattack. He steps toward the plotting table, where staff officers hover over maps cluttered with colored markers and grease pencil lines. Order all panzer divisions. Hoth says, his voice low but firm. Prepare to engage. If they strike tomorrow, they strike into us head-on. Schmidt nods and rushes out, shouting orders. Behind Hoth, an intelligence officer speaks quietly to another. They say it's Rotmistrov himself bringing the tanks. General Pavel Rotmistrov, the man famous for one thing: attacks with overwhelming force at point-blank range. Hoth hears the whispers but pretends not to. He returns to the edge of the dugout and looks into the darkness. Somewhere out there, beyond the fields and rail lines, thousands of Soviet tankers are climbing into their machines. Engines are warming. Tracks tightening. A storm is coming. A steel storm. Just before dawn, the first sound arrives at a low, rolling thunder. Not weather. Engines, hundreds of them. The ground begins to tremble, dust rising from the earth in thin, dancing columns. Birds erupt from the trees, scattering into the pale light as if fleeing the end of the world. Staudigger lifts his head slightly inside his Tiger. You feel that? Muller asks. Oh yes, Staudigger answers. They're coming. A moment later, the radio crackles to life. All units. Enemy armor advancing in mass. Prepare for contact. The hatch opens and Staudigger rises into the morning air. He sees the railway embankment, the open fields beyond, and the faint shimmer of heat on the horizon. Then he sees shapes, dozens, scores, hundreds, like a tidal wave of steel stretching from one end of the steppe to the other. T-34/76 to 70S, even the hulking Su-152 assault guns, their silhouettes unmistakable. They're charging. Gunner! Staudigger yells as he drops back inside. Target front. T-34 column. The Tiger's turret whirs to the right. Range 800. Loaded. Fire. The Tiger's cannon erupts with a deafening blast, sending a shell tearing across the field. T-34 blooms into flame. But nothing stops. The Soviets don't slow. They don't maneuver. They come straight on, kicking up waves of dust, firing on the move, every turret belching flame. This is not a normal armored engagement. This is a collision at a full-speed charge into the teeth of the German spearhead. From his forward observation post, General Hoth watches in stunned silence. He had expected a counterattack. Yes, but this is something else entirely. Through the haze, he sees the Soviet tanks. Darting through the morning mist, dozens of them cresting ridgelines, more emerging from behind the embankment. Their engines roar like a sea of molten metal that a staff officer beside him whispers. Mein Gott, Hoth doesn't turn. He simply grips the edge of the sandbag wall so tightly his knuckles turn white that he knows what this means. The Soviets didn't merely anticipate the German attack. They built the terrain for it, prepared the ground for it, waited for the exact moment when German armor was overextended, damaged, and committed. And now they're unleashing everything. This isn't defense. This is annihilation. Down on the battlefield, chaos reigns. Staudegger's Tiger rocks as a Soviet shell slams into the turret, glancing off. With a shower of sparks, Muller shouts, "Non-penetration. We're fine. Keep firing." Staudegger orders, "Take them at close range." But within minutes, smoke and dust cover everything. You can barely see 10 meters. German tanks are firing blind. Soviet tanks are firing point-blank. A T-1 point. A T-34 slams directly into a Panzer IV, its tracks climbing the hull before both machines erupt in fire. Infantry scatter, diving into shell holes as tanks race past them like charging beasts. Radio chatter becomes a wall of noise. We're flanked. Enemy breakthrough on our left. They're everywhere, too many targets. A German Tiger crew screams over the radio as an Su-152's massive shell detonates nearby, flipping their 56-ton machine like a toy. The battlefield is no longer lines and formations. It's a maelstrom, a swirling, burning, metallic hurricane. By mid-morning, the steppe looks like the surface of another planet. Craters, wrecks, twisted hulks of once proud machines. Staudegger wipes sweat from his eyes. The air inside the Tiger feels like an oven. The ammunition rack is half empty. The gun barrel glows faintly red. "Commander," Muller shouts. 5 more T-34s moving fast. Stadegger clenches his jaw. Then we keep firing. Another blast. Another tank destroyed. But for every one that falls, 3 more appear, cresting the hills, charging through the smoke, silhouettes in the fires. The Soviets are not breaking. They're accelerating. This is rotational assault. Waves upon waves, cycling fresh units into the fight while the Germans tire, overheat, and bleed. Stadegger finally sees it, truly sees it. "They have endless armor," he mutters. "Endless armor." At his command post, Hoth sees it too. Reports stream in. Panzer regiments depleted. Ammunition low. Panthers immobilized. Tigers surrounded. Infantry isolated. Hoth's chief of staff approaches. "If we continue like this, we will be encircled. We must withdraw." Hoth says nothing. Not because he disagrees, but because he understands the consequence of the words, that a withdrawal means the attack has failed. Operation Citadel has failed. The last hope of regaining the initiative in the east, gone. That he looks once more through his binoculars at the endless waves of Soviet tanks crashing against the German line, and he finally speaks. "Begin a fighting withdrawal. Save as many as we can." The words taste like ash, because in that moment, Hoth knows the truth. Kursk is lost, and with it, the war. The Wehrmacht will never again seize the strategic initiative. From this day on, they will retreat, slowly, painfully, relentlessly, across the ruins of the Eastern Front. And the Red Army, rising from the fire, will push them all the way back to Berlin. July 12, 1943. South of Prokhorovka, near Hill 252.2. Late morning. The battlefield burns, not in isolated patches, but as one continuous, churning inferno stretching across the entire horizon. Black pillars of smoke twist upward, blotting out the sun. The heat is unbearable, radiating off burning tank hulls until the air itself seems to ripple and melt. The smell, oil, rubber, earth, flesh, hangs over the steppe like a physical weight. And still the tanks fight, still the guns roar, still the men scream orders through shattered radios and cracked periscopes. Inside his Tiger, Hauptmann Franz Stadegger feels the tracks grinding through mud, shell holes, and shattered metal. The hull vibrates with every hit, glancing or otherwise. The engine groans like a wounded beast. "Remaining rounds?" Stadegger asks, wiping sweat from his brow. Muller checks the ammo rack. AP-4. He's 6. 4 armor-piercing shells against what feels like an entire army. Stadegger doesn't show his fear. He can't. Not now. He leans forward and peers through the gun sight. Shadows move in the smoke. Fast, low silhouettes. T-34s. Again. Load AP. Target front. He barks. The breech slams shut. The Tiger fires. T-34 disappears in a burst of sparks and flame. But another appears instantly, racing around the burning wreck with terrifying speed. Traverse right. Quickly. The turret grinds, slow under stress. Too slow. The Soviet tank fires first. The shell slams into the Tiger's flank. The compartment fills with blinding white sparks and choking smoke. The vehicle rocks violently. Non-penetration. Muller coughs. Play held, but Stadegger can feel it. The Tiger is being worn down, inch by inch, strike by strike. Armor doesn't fail all at once. It weakens, fractures, fatigues. Every hit brings them closer to death. Outside, the battlefield is collapsing. German grenadiers scramble between burning wrecks, pressed flat against the earth as T-34s thunder past. A Panzer IV explodes nearby, its turret launched into the air like a discarded toy. A wounded radio man crawls desperately across the dirt, shouting for stretcher bearers who will never arrive. And above it all, Soviet IL. 2 Sturmoviks scream overhead, their cannons cutting lines of fire through the German rear positions. The sky, the earth, the very air. Everything is turning against Army Group South. From his command post, General Oberst Hermann Hoth watches the crescendo of the Soviet attack with a hollow, distant expression. He has stopped issuing orders. There are no more tactics to apply and breakthroughs to push and counterthrust to attempt. The battlefield no longer obeys maps or doctrine. It is chaos. And the Soviets thrive in chaos. A young lieutenant bursts into the dugout, saluting with shaky hands. "General, sir." The Leibstandard has reported heavy losses. Das Reich is pulling back to secondary positions. The Panthers, most are immobile. And the Tigers, Hoth raises a hand. The lieutenant falls silent. He already knows. Every report, every message tells the same story. German forces cannot hold Prokhorovka. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. The dream of recapturing the strategic initiative with this offensive, the last gamble of the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front, dies in front of his eyes, and adjutant steps closer. Orders, her general? Hoth closes his eyes, not from despair, but from acceptance. "The order stands," he says softly. "Fighting withdrawal. Preserve the army. Save what we can." He opens his eyes again. They seem older, years older. "We cannot win here. Not anymore." Back on the front line, Staudegger's Tiger grinds to a halt as a massive crater blocks their path. Flames dance around them. The air is a storm of ash and dust. "Reverse," Staudegger commands. Nothing. The transmission grinds, snarls, then falls silent. They're stuck. T-34 bursts through the smoke, charging directly toward them. Its commander stands half out of the turret, firing a PPSH-41 as he closes the distance. Staudegger reacts instantly. Muller. The loader slams a high-explosive shell into the breach. The Tiger fires. The shell detonates just under the T-34's hull, flipping it onto its side in a spray of dirt and shredded metal. The Tiger is still alive, barely, but around them, the line is gone. Through the shattered periscope, Staudegger sees German armor pulling back. What remains of it? Panthers burning. Panzer IVs limping away with wounded crew on the hull. Smoke streaming from Tigers that once seemed invincible. Kursk has shattered them. Muller swallows hard. "Sir, what do we do?" Staudegger looks at the battlefield, at the wrecks, at the roaring Soviet advance. "We don't die for nothing," he says. "Signal nearby infantry. We hold off the next wave, then withdraw on foot if we have to." On foot? Through that. Unless you want to wait for another 100 T-34s to arrive. The crew nods silently. This is not victory. This is survival. WY late afternoon. The Soviet assault finally begins to slow. Not because they are defeated, but because they have driven the Germans back far enough to consolidate their gains. The fields around Prokhorovka are littered with the corpses of tanks and men. Over 300 German armored vehicles are destroyed, disabled, or abandoned. The Soviets have lost even more, but they can afford to. Their reserves are endless. Their production lines unstoppable. Germany has no such luxury. Hoth stands at the doorway of his command post, staring across the smoking plains as dusk settles in. Schmidt approaches, his face streaked with dust and exhaustion. "General, Berlin requests an assessment." Hoth doesn't turn. "They won't like my assessment." "What should I tell them, sir?" Hoth finally faces him. "Tell them the truth. Tell them the Red Army stopped us. Tell them they held the line. Tell them they counterattacked with such force that even our best divisions could not stand." He pauses, his voice lowering. "Tell them the initiative is lost." Schmidt hesitates. "Lost for now? Or?" Hoth shakes his head. "Lost. Completely. We will never regain it." In the fading light, the truth hangs heavy. Kursk is not just a failed offensive. It is a turning point, a shift in the war so profound that every German officer, from lieutenant to field marshal, feels it in his bones. From this day forward, the Red Army will dictate the pace of the war, and Germany will retreat, step by step, mile by mile, all the way back to Berlin. The general watches the glow of burning tanks flicker across the steppe. He has seen the future, and it is rolling toward him on steel tracks. July 13th, 1943. Western edge of the Prokhorovka battlefield. Midnight. The fires burn through the night. Not even darkness can hide the devastation. Flames climb out of tank hulls like torches, casting long, grotesque shadows across the pitted ground. Embers drift through the air, landing softly on helmets, tunics, and the twisted remains of machines that, hours earlier, roared with life in the distance. The Soviets are still moving. Resupply trucks, recovery vehicles, headlights masked, silhouettes gliding across the blackened steppe like specters. They are not afraid of a German counterattack. There will be none. Inside a shallow gully near Hill 252.2, Hauptmann Franz Stadegger sits beside the ruined carcass of his Tiger. The vehicle still smolders. The main gun droops like a broken limb. Every few minutes, the metal pops and clicks as it cools. His crew lies around him, exhausted, soot-covered, half-deaf. Muller, the gunner, rubs his temples. "Sir, any chance of recovery?" Stadegger shakes his head. "We're beyond the lines. Recovery crews won't come this far. Not today. Not ever." The men know what that means. Abandonment. A fate no German tanker accepts easily, especially for a machine like the Tiger. 80 millimeters of frontal armor, an 88 millimeters gun feared across continents, the pride of the Heer. But here, tonight, it's just another carcass on a field of countless others that the faint rustle of boots approaches. Two grenadiers crawl down into the gully, dirt caking their faces. "Sir," one whispers, "panzers are pulling back. Infantry's falling behind a tree line near the stream. If we stay, we're cut off." Stadegger exhales slowly. So it begins. The retreat. He stands, wincing as a muscle in his leg spasms. "Rally your squad. We move west." Quietly, they climb from the gully and begin walking, staying low, weaving between wrecks that glow faintly as their oil reservoirs burn. Above them, Soviet illumination flares drift down in slow, silent arcs, bathing the land in a sickly, artificial daylight. The men freeze each time a flare pops. They expect shots, tracer fire, shouts in Russian, but none come. The Soviets have what they want. The field is theirs at a few kilometers back, in a wooden farmhouse converted into a temporary command post. General Oberst Hermann Hoth sits hunched over a field telephone. A single lantern casts flickering shadows across the walls. The air inside is thick with smoke from a nearby barn fire. A voice drones from the receiver. OKW headquarters in East Prussia. The tone is clipped, bureaucratic, utterly detached from the carnage outside. "General Hoth, Berlin insists the offensive must continue. The Führer expects results. You are to regroup and prepare renewed attacks to the east." Hoth closes his eyes as the words wash over him like ice water. "Continue." He can barely get ammunition to the front. Panthers are bogged down or burning. Infantry divisions are at half strength. The panzers need new tracks, new wheels, new engines, things that won't arrive until weeks too late. He grips the receiver so tightly his glove creaks. "My units are exhausted," he says, his voice measured but shaking. "Losses are severe. Panzer regiments are depleted. The Soviets have introduced fresh forces, entire armies. If we push again, we will break." Silence crackles over the line. A long, cold silence. Then a distant voice replies, "That assessment is pessimistic. The Führer believes the Russians are at their limit." Hoth's jaw tightens. He switches the receiver to his other hand. "Sir, with respect, what is happening at Kursk is unprecedented. The Red Army has not reached its limit. They have just begun." More silence. Then an impatient tone. "General, your duty is clear. Hold your positions. Prepare to attack." The line goes dead. Hoth lowers the receiver, his hand trembling slightly. He stares at the wooden table in front of him. Maps, casualty lists, ammunition tallies. Numbers that no longer mattered. A shadow moves in the doorway. Oberst Schmidt stands there, his face lined with dust and fatigue. "Orders from Berlin?" he asks quietly. Hoth nods once. "Hold the line. Prepare for renewed assaults." Schmidt understands immediately. He presses his lips tightly together. "But what will you actually order?" he asks. Hoth looks up at him with eyes that seem far older than yesterday. "I will save the army," he whispers. For the first time in his career, Hermann Hoth intends to disobey a strategic directive. Not out of rebellion, but out of cold, brutal necessity. He taps the map with one gloved finger. begin the withdrawal. Quietly, before the Soviets realize. Schmidt exhales with relief and fear at once. By dawn on July 14th, German forces begin pulling back from the forward positions around Prokhorovka. The retreat is not a rout, disciplined, organized, but it is unmistakably a retreat. Artillery limbers up and moves west. Infantry battalions slip into the forests. Tank battalions drive slowly, engines strained, crews half asleep. Along the roads, wounded men march with makeshift crutches. Medics carry stretchers with faces hidden beneath blood-soaked cloths. A.S. Stadegger and what remains of his crew reach a regrouping point. They see an endless column of men and machines stretching into the distance. No banners, no songs, no victories. Just weary faces coated in ash and resignation. About a major stands on the roadside, directing traffic. When he spots Stadegger, he salutes. "Heard about your fight," the major says. "They say you knocked out 17 T-34s. "Doesn't matter," Stadegger replies. "They had hundreds." The major nods grimly. And they still do. Hours later, Hoth stands beside a dusty road as the remnants of his panzer divisions roll past him. Panthers missing tracks, Tigers with patched armor, Panzer IVs dragging wounded behind them, half-tracks crammed with infantry, too tired to speak. He lifts his field glasses and peers east one last time. Across the burning steppe, dust clouds rise. Columns of Red Army vehicles advancing methodically into positions the Germans held only the day before. The realization settles over him fully now. Not as a shock, not as a cold whisper, but as a certainty carved deep into his bones. Kursk is more than a lost battle. It is the death of the Wehrmacht's offensive power. The Red Army will never again allow Germany to seize the initiative. From this point forward, the tide will push only one direction. West. Always west. Hoth lowers his binoculars and turns away. "Move out," he orders quietly. Behind him, the steppe burns on, lighting the path of the retreat and the long shadow that will stretch all the way to Berlin. July 13th, 1943. South of Prokhorovka. The night air hangs thick with smoke and drifting embers, a low haze that turns every lantern into a trembling halo. General Friedrich Hassbach stands beside the command half-track, his gloved hand resting on the still warm hull. The metal vibrates faintly, echoes of distant artillery, the endless heartbeat of the Kursk salient. Around him, staff officers shuffle maps under flickering light, their voices hoarse, their faces caked with soot. Far to the east, the sky pulses orange. Not flashes, glows, not battle, burning. The retreat has begun. A courier sprints up the shallow slope. "General, message from XLVII Panzer Corps." He salutes, breath ragged. The Soviets have committed another armored reserve. Estimated 200 tanks. Possibly more. Hassbach stiffens, though no one would notice except the adjutant at his side point. 200 more? After the slaughter at Prokhorovka? After the thousands already committed? He opens the message tube, unrolls the paper. The handwriting is rushed, streaked with sweat and dust, but the meaning is unmistakable. Our forces cannot hold another wave. Ammunition low. Losses unsustainable. Request immediate withdrawal authorization. Hassbach lowers the note that he doesn't need a map. He knows every contour of this battlefield now. Every ridge, every trench, every field of burning steel. And he knows what this message means. The line is not bending. It is breaking. Behind him, two mechanics crawl over a torn Panzer IV. The turret hatch is open, the edge blackened, the interior charred. One of the crewmen's helmets still lies in the dirt, pierced by a jagged shard of armor plate, a fragment of its own tank. Hassbach looks away as a staff officer approaches, clearing his throat softly. "General, General Model is expecting a situation report within the hour." Hassbach nods. "Prepare it. Include everything. No euphemisms." The officer hesitates. "Sir, everything?" "Yes." His voice is flat, exactly as it stands. The man swallows and turns back toward the cluster of command vehicles. Hassbach steps out a few paces into the darkness. The ground crunches under his boots, spent shell casings, broken branches, shattered glass. The steppe wind shifts, carrying the faint clatter of Soviet tracks advancing somewhere beyond the smoke that he listens. It's a sound he had heard before, briefly, at the gates of Moscow in 1941, when the first T-34s emerged through the snow like phantoms. Back then, the Wehrmacht still had momentum, still had the advantage of shock, of initiative, of experience. But now, the Red Army has learned, adapted, grown into a force that fights with new doctrine, new command structures, and endless industrial muscle. And Hausbach breathes slowly. They have built an armored fist Germany cannot afford to match, and orderly jogs up, stopping at a respectful distance. Sir, radio intercepts from Soviet Front HQ. They're moving forward bridging units, preparing for a general advance. Of course they are, Hausbach thinks. Once the Germans lose momentum, the Soviets never let go. Very well, he replies. Alert all regiments. Prepare fallback positions. We hold until 0400, then withdraw by phases. Yes, General. As the orderly leaves, Hausbach gazes again at the burning horizon. IT is not just a battlefield. IT is a verdict. Hours later, inside the command dugout, the lanterns sway as the earth trembles, a steady, rhythmic pounding. Not artillery this time. Not explosions. Tank engines. Soviet tank engines. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Hausbach and his staff crowd around the field telephone line still active. Reports flood in, short, breathless transmissions from frontline battalions. They're breaking through the tree line. More tanks than we can count. Request permission to reposition. Enemy pressure overwhelming. Infantry falling back. Heavy casualties. We can't stop them. The phone operator looks up, pale. General, Hauptmann Weber from the 11th Panzer. He says they're being overrun. Hausbach takes the receiver himself. Weber. It's Hausbach. Static crackles. General. Weber's voice is strained. A man speaking while running. They're everywhere. T-34S. T-43 prototypes. God knows what else. We've knocked out several, but there's no end to them. Can you disengage? Hausbach asks quietly. We're trying, sir, but a deafening metallic crash erupts through the line. Screams. Grinding steel. Then a single voice. They're in the rear positions. We can't. The line goes dead. Hausbach lowers the receiver slowly. Around the table, officers stare at him. No one speaks. Finally, he says, begin destruction of sensitive documents. Prepare the convoys. We are withdrawing under pressure. The men salute and disperse with grim efficiency. Outside, engines roar to life. Orders are shouted. Headlamps flicker through dust and darkness that a young lieutenant approaches, barely 23. His uniform is immaculate despite the chaos. His expression earnest but shaken. General, sir, may I ask, will this change the outcome of the operation? Hausbach studies him for a long moment. This is the outcome, he says. The lieutenant nods, swallowing hard, and hurries back into the night. Hausbach steps outside one final time before the retreat begins. The open steppe lies before him, lit by burning wrecks and the dull glow of artillery flashes. The wind carries the clatter of Soviet tracks rolling ever closer. He closes his eyes. There are moments in every commander's life when clarity arrives like a blow. And here, on this blackened plain, surrounded by the ruins of Germany's finest armored divisions, he feels that moment settle over him like frost. The war was not lost today, nor yesterday. But here at Kursk, on these fields of metal and fire, it became unwinnable. He turns toward the waiting vehicles. Move out. July 14th, 1943. Western edge of the Belgorod, a Boyan road. Dawn breaks as a thin, weak line of gold barely able to cut through the swells of drifting smoke. The retreating German columns move like wounded animals, slow, disjointed, wary of every shadow along the roadside. Half-tracks sputter and cough. Panzer IVs limp along with patched road wheels, hasty welds, or missing skirts. Infantry march in silence. Helmets low, rifles slung, eyes down, General Friedrich Hassbach rides in the passenger seat of a muddy SD, KFC 251, the canvas roof rolled back. Dust billows across their wake, coating uniforms and clinging to dried blood on the hull. He keeps one arm braced against the frame as the machine lurches over ruts and shell craters. Every few minutes, a distant boom rolls across the steppe, Soviet artillery adjusting their range as they probe for the retreating Germans. The Red Army is not chasing blindly. They have learned patience, coordination, precision. They advance like a grinding machine. One Hassbach knows he cannot stop. Ahead, the column slows. A military policeman waves frantically. The driver brakes, and Hassbach steps out. The bottleneck becomes clear immediately. A destroyed Panzer Grenadier truck blocks half the road, its chassis still smoldering. The smell of burned canvas mixes with the harsher scent of cooked metal. Medics kneel beside two wounded soldiers pulled from the wreck. Their bandages already red and heavied. A lieutenant rushes toward Hassbach. "General, apologies. We're clearing it as fast as we can, but there are Soviet reconnaissance units flanking us. We've spotted light armor in the tree line." Hassbach squints toward the horizon. A faint line of dust rises behind low hills. Armored cars, perhaps, or something larger. "Get that wreck off the road," he orders. "If it won't move, drag it. We can't lose daylight." "Yes, sir." As he walks back toward the half-track, he hears a distant whistle overhead, followed by the sudden scream of diving aircraft. "Sturmovix," someone shouts. The sky splits with the roar of engines. Black silhouettes plunge from the sun, their wings bristling with rockets. Hassbach dives behind the half-track as the first salvo lands. Explosions rip through the road. The destroyed truck erupts again in a blast of fuel and splintered wood. A second rocket slams into the dirt 50 meters away, throwing a plume of soil and debris across the column. Men scatter. Vehicles swerve off-road. Machine gunners scramble to return fire, their 7.92 millimeters rounds pattering uselessly against armored undersides. The Sturmovix finish their run and climb away, trailing smoke but unbroken. Silence settles in, jagged and heavy. Hassbach rises slowly, dust sliding from his coat. His ears ring. His driver approaches with shaken eyes. "Sir, casualties are moderate, but we lost 2 more vehicles." Hassbach nods once. "Get them moving again. Every minute we delay, the Soviets tighten the noose." By late morning, the column reaches a low ridge overlooking a vast sweep of wheat fields. The wind pushes waves across the golden stalks, bending them in long, slow arcs. Somewhere beneath the beauty lies the reality of war. Trenches, shell fragments, bodies that a dispatch rider arrives with a sealed message. Hassbach opens it, already expecting the worst. Von Kluge orders all forces to withdraw to the Hagen Line. Soviet penetration on the northern face of the salient is accelerating. Defensive posture to be adopted immediately. He folds the paper carefully, though the weight of the words sinks like stone. Beside him, Oberstleutnant Schaff adjusts his binoculars. "General, the High Command still believes we can stabilize the front." Hassbach gives a dry, humorless laugh. "Stabilize? Look out there, Schaff. This is not a front. It's a tide." In the distance, faint glints of sunlight reflect off advancing armor. Soviet tanks emerging from a patch of woodland, their silhouettes unmistakable even at a mile. And tides, Hassbach adds quietly, do not retreat. Schaff lowers the binoculars, the truth settling in his expression. They climb back into the half-track. Engines growl. Tracks grind. The column continues westward. Hours later, the retreat halts again, this time at a village called Berezovka. Once just a cluster of timber cottages and barns, it now serves as a temporary triage station. Stretchers line the road. Field surgeons work under tent flaps stained dark with blood. Horses stand tethered beside medical trucks, their flanks trim mooring from exhaustion. Hassbach dismounts, walking among the wounded. A young Feldwebel grips his arm. "General," the man's voice trembles. Did we really lose the whole push? Everything we gained these days?" Hassbach kneels to him, voice low but firm. "You fought bravely. Every man here did. But the enemy was prepared. Better prepared than we believed. The soldier nods slowly, tears mixing with dirt on his cheeks. As Hasbach rises, a medic calls out, "General, could you speak to him?" He gestures toward an older tank commander, Hauptmann Meyer of the 7th Panzer Regiment. Lying against a barn wall, his uniform scorched, his left arm gone below the elbow. Hasbach approaches. Meyer opens one eye, manages a faint smile. "Sir, did we make a difference?" Hasbach's throat tightens, not from sentiment, but from the cruelty of truth. "You made every difference you could," he says quietly. "But the enemy, they brought more tanks than we imagined. More than anyone imagined." Meyer exhales slowly. T-34s everywhere, like wolves circling. He trails off, slipping into unconsciousness that a medic steps forward, checking his pulse. "He'll live, sir, but he won't return to the front." Hasbach nods that a thunderous crack echoes from the east. Soviet artillery again, getting closer. Time is running out. The adjutant runs toward him. "General, recon reports enemy armor crossing the creek 2 kilometers east of here. If we don't move now, they'll cut the road." Hasbach takes one last look around the village. The wounded, the wreckage, the exhausted columns fighting to regroup. Then he speaks with crisp, cold authority. "Signal all units. We withdraw immediately. No delays. No exceptions." The adjutant salutes and sprints away. Engines roar. Officers shout commands. The wounded are loaded onto trucks with urgency bordering on desperation. Hasbach climbs into the half-track once more. Ahead lies a road that leads away from Kursk, but not away from defeat. He grips the frame as the vehicle jolts forward. He can feel it now, clearer than ever. Kursk is no longer a battle. It is a breaking point, and the Wehrmacht is marching toward a future shaped by this failure. "Drive," he says. The column moves. July 15th, 1943. Outskirts of Tomarovka, a gray afternoon sky hangs low over the plains, thick with smoke and the oily haze of burning armor. The retreating German column snakes along a dirt road flanked by abandoned positions. Trenches collapsing into themselves, ammunition crates overturned, field kitchens still warm but deserted. General Friedrich Hasbach stands atop a small ridgeline, surveying the valley ahead before committing his forces to the next stage of withdrawal. A cool wind rolls across the steppe, carrying the metallic scent of spent gunpowder and the faint, rhythmic clatter of engines. Enemy engines, somewhere beyond the southern hills. His adjutant hands him the field glasses. Hasbach raises them. What he sees turns the blood in his veins to ice. On the far slope, emerging through a gap between smoldering trees, a line of T-34s crawls forward, dozens of them. Their hulls are coated with dust, their tracks thick with mud, their turrets swiveling with practiced, predatory ease. Behind them march fresh Soviet infantry in disciplined waves, bayonets fixed, rifles slung over shoulders. Mortar teams plod behind, dragging their tubes like executioners bringing their tools. But it isn't the number that strikes him hardest, it's the spacing, the formation, the coordination. This is no desperate Soviet counterattack. This is a synchronized advance, one born of confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing you have more tanks in reserve, more artillery, more men, more time. A shadow crosses the ground. Hasbach looks up. Another formation of IL, 2 Sturmovix sweeps overhead, heading toward the German rear. The aircraft fly in a tight V, engines thundering so low the ground vibrates beneath his boots. The Red Air Force owns the sky now. Behind him, a captain approaches, breathless. "General, communications from the 3rd Panzer Division. They report being forced out of Hill 247. Enemy armor pressing hard." "How hard?" Hasbach asks. The captain hesitates. "They say the Soviets have committed another tank brigade. Possibly 2. Hasbach lowers the field glasses. That's it. The calculation is complete. This isn't just a setback, not a failed operation, not even a major defeat. This is the turning point, the moment Germany loses the last realistic chance to regain the strategic initiative in the East. The moment the war turns from a struggle for victory to a struggle for survival." He speaks quietly, almost to himself. They've built an army we can't break. The captain blinks. Sir, Hassbach straightens, his voice hardening. Inform all regiments. We establish a delaying line along the western ridge, then fall back to the Hagen positions before nightfall. Yes, sir. As the captain sprints away, Hassbach remains on the ridge a moment longer, letting the truth settle over him. He watches the Soviet tanks advance across the valley, relentless as the tide. Some roll over the burned-out husks of their own predecessors, crushing them into the soil. Metal on metal, emblematic of the merciless, grinding nature of this war. The Germans had come to Kursk expecting to finish what they started in 1941, but instead, they found an enemy reborn. 30 minutes later, Hassbach's half-track races westward, weaving around convoys of infantry. He stands upright in the open compartment, gripping the rail as the wind tears at his greatcoat. They pass the remains of a shattered panzer battalion. Tanks reduced to skeletal hulks, turrets blown clear, tracks twisted like snapped tendons. Flies swarm around blackened compartments. Spare track links lie scattered like bones. The driver mutters under his breath. I've never seen tanks killed like this. Not ours. Not so fast. Hassbach says nothing. But he knows what he is looking at. Not destruction. Replacement. Germany could build tanks. Fine tanks, Panthers, Tigers, Panzer IVs. But not enough. Never enough. The Soviets could replace an entire battalion's worth of vehicles in 1 week. Germany could not replace a battalion's worth of veteran crews in 1 year that a courier motorcycle pulls alongside them, signaling for Hassbach. The general leans down as the rider, face streaked with grime, shouts above the engine noise. General, Soviet armor has broken through the flank of the 167th Infantry. They're moving faster than expected. They'll intersect the main road within the hour. Hassbach grips the edge of the track until his knuckles whiten. That road is their lifeline. If cut, thousands of German soldiers will be trapped on the wrong side of the encirclement. Order all reserves to the southern approach, Hassbach commands. Tell them to hold it, no matter the cost. The messenger peels away, engine screaming. Hassbach watches him go, the weight of what he's just said sinking in, and no matter the cost. Cost they can no longer afford. The half-track rounds a bend, revealing a ridge overlooking the main supply route. Trucks, ambulances, horse carts, and tanks move in a chaotic procession, an army trying desperately to outrun its fate. Hassbach steps down, boots crunching over gravel. There, on the horizon, dust plumes rise, not from retreat, from pursuit. The Soviet vanguard, he closes his eyes for a heartbeat. This is the moment. Not the explosions, not the tanks burning at Prokhorovka, not the failed northern pincer. Not even Hitler canceling Operation Citadel. This, watching the enemy advance while his own army, once invincible, flees before it. A lieutenant approaches, awaiting orders. Hassbach speaks with solemn clarity, every word carved from the truth he can no longer deny. Pass the signal. All units are to continue withdrawal. There will be no counterattack. Yes, General. As the officer turns to relay the message, Hassbach looks once more toward the east. The Soviet tanks crest the ridge, silhouettes of steel against a sky blackened by war. He knows what they represent. Not simply defeat, but the future in which Berlin streets will echo with the same rumble of tracks now rolling across the steppe. He steps back into the half-track. Drive, he says, and the retreat continues, stretching westward, toward the last years of a war that, in this moment, he knows, Germany can no longer win. July 16th, 1943. Evening. Western approaches to Belgorod. The German army's retreat stretches for miles, a slow, grinding procession of dust, smoke, and exhausted men. Tracks tear through dirt roads, churning mud with every passing panzer. Infantry plods alongside, rifles slung, helmets cracked, eyes hollow from days without rest. Horses stumble under overloaded carts. Wagons creak with the groans of the wounded. General Friedrich Hassbach rides near the front of the column in a half-track, peering ahead through a haze of smoke and dust. Every few minutes, tracer rounds streak across the horizon, fired by distant Soviet reconnaissance or artillery, probing their withdrawal. It is a constant, subtle reminder. The Red Army is relentless, and the Germans cannot outrun their judgment. Beside him, his operations officer whispers, voice tight with exhaustion, "General, our casualties are mounting faster than we can report. Fuel is running low. Panzer divisions are losing cohesion. If the Soviets press the flanks, we could be cut off entirely." Hasbach nods grimly. He already knows. Across the ridge, the horizon glows with the aftermath of another day's fighting. Smoke rises from burning tanks and trucks, forming columns that twist upward into the gray sky. The smell of scorched oil and rubber mingles with the acrid tang of blood. Fields once green are now churned into mud and cratered earth, a graveyard of steel, and men that a lieutenant approaches, kneeling to speak quietly. "Sir," reports from the 4th Panzer Corps. "They say the Soviets have introduced another fresh division. Artillery is moving into our previous positions." Hasbach glances eastward. The Red Army is not pausing. They have reserves Germany cannot match. They are reorganizing, reinforcing, and methodically pushing forward. He exhales slowly. "Then the battle is over," he murmurs. The lieutenant swallows. "Sir, it is more than a battle. Some say Kursk has changed the nature of this entire campaign." Hasbach looks at the battlefield stretching behind him. The thought is bitter but undeniable. The Wehrmacht's last hope of seizing the initiative in the east is gone. He remembers the first day. The anticipation, the armored thrusts toward Orel and Belgorod, the confidence of officers who believed they could crush the Soviet salient in one decisive blow. Those days feel like another lifetime. Now, the army limps westward, never again to dictate terms on this front. The half-track halts briefly as a convoy of wounded soldiers and limping vehicles overtakes them. Stretcher bearers stumble under the weight of men torn apart by artillery and armor. Hasbach steps down and surveys the scene. A young Feldwebel catches his eye, blood streaming down his temple, uniform torn. "Sir, will we ever regain the lost ground?" he asks quietly, voice trembling. Hasbach shakes his head. "No, not from here. Not ever." He turns back to the road, where armored vehicles continue to crawl westward. Behind them, the glowing steppe stretches endlessly, dotted with wrecked panzers, burned-out trucks, and the remnants of the last German offensive. The knowledge presses on him with suffocating weight. Germany's ability to launch another offensive on the Eastern Front has ended. The Red Army now sets the tempo. Every advance, every maneuver, every clash from this point on will be dictated by them. Even the finest tanks, the most disciplined divisions, the cleverest tactics, they cannot restore the lost initiative. The strategic moment has passed, irretrievably. As night falls, the last rays of sun glint off the twisted metal of destroyed tanks, painting the battlefield in a sickly, golden light. Fires still burn. Smoke drifts lazily across the steppe. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the distant rumble of Soviet engines echoes, a relentless drumbeat that will follow the Germans west for years to come. Hasbach climbs back into his half-track. The engine sputters, then roars to life. He grips the frame, staring into the darkness ahead. Every mile westward is a mile closer to survival, but also a mile further from victory. He knows the truth now with absolute clarity. Kursk was not just a battle. It was the turning point. From this moment on, Germany would no longer control the war, and the Red Army, advancing across the steppe like an unstoppable tide, would drive them all the way back to Berlin. The half-track lurches forward. Engines roar. Tracks grind. The long retreat continues.